In this session, we are going to learn about different pigments which are involved in the process of photosynthesis. So let us start. In the previous lecture, we studied about uh, an introductory brief on photosynthesis and where it takes place. So we know that photosynthesis majorly occurs in the green parts of the plant or the leaves, which contains chloroplast. Now inside these chloroplasts there are various pigments which help in carrying out the photosynthesis. Now if you look at the leaves of different plants, then the color of the leaves vary in different plant, right? Colors vary among leaves. So if we look closely, then there are different shades of green. We can observe that some of the leaves are light green in color, some of the leaves are dark green in color, and sometimes even different types of colors, a bit purplish, yellowish, reddish, or other shades are also seen. So do you think that is it a single color, or is it a combination of different colors? So in order to carry out, or in order to find out whether these different shades of green are because of one single substance or a combination of different substance, we can carry out the paper chromatography. To separate out these components and see whether the color is because of a single substance or not. Alright, so if we do the paper chromatography of the different shades of green found in most of the plants, then we usually find that plants have 4 types of pigments. 4 types of pigments are generally found inside the leaves of the photosynthesizing plants. Now, what are these pigments? These pigments are actually special substances that absorb light at specific wavelength. So we know that each color of light has a specific wavelength, right? So different colored light are absorbed by special substances which are called pigments. Since we are studying about photosynthesis, and what is photosynthesis? It is absorption of sunlight, right? So we are talking about the absorption of sunlight, and sunlight, as we all know, is made up of different colors: violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red, right? The Vibgyor. So these pigments, different types of pigments, will absorb different lights at specific wavelengths. These are called pigments. And if we do the paper chromatography to separate out, to find out what all pigments are usually found in the photosynthesizing plants or their leaves, then we will come to know that there are mainly 4 types of pigments. So what are those pigments? Let us write down the names. So the first pigment is chlorophyll A. This provides bright or blue-green color to the plant or the leaves. Then second pigment called chlorophyll B. It is yellow green. It imparts yellow green color to the leaves. Then we have xanthophylls, which give yellowish color to the leaf. And finally we have carotenoids, which impart yellow to orange yellow color. So as we can see that these different shades of leaf are because of a combination of these chlorophyll and xanthophyll as well as carotenoid pigments, and the variation in their amount in the leaf leads to a different shade of green in each of the plant. Right now each of these is a pigment, that means they will be responsible for the trapping of sunlight in order to carry out photosynthesis. Now if we talk about these four pigments, then out of these four, the chlorophyll A is the most abundant plant pigment. Chlorophyll A is the most abundant plant pigment in the world. That means most of the photosynthesizing plants will have a higher amount of chlorophyll A. Alright? Now let us find out which of these four pigments absorb the highest amount of sunlight, and after that we will find out which of these four pigments carry out or give or contribute to a higher rate of photosynthesis in plants. So for that we need to draw a graph which will be called the absorption spectrum. So if we draw the specific wavelengths 400 nanometer to 700 nanometer, now this is the visible range of the light. Alright, visible range. So the visible range of the light ranges from 400 nanometer to 700 nanometer wavelength, right, starting from violet and ending in red. Vibgyor, Vibgyor. So it starts with 400 nanometer, which is the region for violet or the blue light, and ends with the 700 nanometer, which is the region for the red light, and all the other light lies in between the 400 and 700 nanometer. Now if we compare the four type of pigments to see at which specific wavelength which of the pigments give, or which of the pigments absorb the most of the light. So first of all let us see the graph for chlorophyll A. So the graph for chlorophyll A is found, the peak is found in the blue region and then towards the red region. This is for chlorophyll A. Then for chlorophyll B, the peak is found slightly further to chlorophyll A, but in the bluish region only, and then towards a small peak towards the red region. Then for carotenoids, this is found somewhere here. The peaks are found in the yellowish orange region, greenish yellow region. So this is for carotenoids. And this was for chlorophyll B. Alright, and this part of the graph shows absorption of light. So the y-axis of the graph shows absorption of light and the x-axis shows the wavelength of the visible range. So from this graph we can conclude that the highest amount of light is absorbed at the 400 nanometer range and the 700 nanometer range, or the 400 nanometer specific wavelength and 700 nanometer, that is in the bluish and the reddish region of the spectrum. What does that mean? That the maximum amount of light which is absorbed from the visible spectrum is the blue light and the red light. Is it clear to you? So the maximum absorption of light is obtained at the bluish region around 400 nanometer and reddish region around the 700 nanometer. We will find the maximum absorption of light. And which component can you see absorbing the most light in the bluish and the reddish region? It is the chlorophyll A only. So if you look at the graph, here was one of the peak of chlorophyll A and the other peak was found in the reddish region, right? Similarly, chlorophyll B too, but not as much as chlorophyll A. So we can say that chlorophyll A is showing the maximum absorption of light. The other pigments are also showing maximum, not the maximum, but the absorption of light at the bluish and the reddish region only. So we can conclude that the photosynthesis occurs at those wavelength or the specific wavelengths which corresponds to the blue light and red light. Alright, so we can say that blue and red light maximum absorbed for photosynthesis. So in the visible range, in the VIBGYOR, violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, out of these 7, only blue and red light shows maximum absorption for photosynthesis by these pigments. So this was about the absorption spectra. It is clear that maximum light is absorbed at the blue and the reddish region. Now let us look at the action spectra, which will tell us about in which region the rate of the photosynthesis will be higher and whether it will coincide with the graph of absorption spectrum. So let me draw a graph again. Here the x-axis will show the same wavelength ranging from 400 to 700 nanometer visible range of light, VIBGYOR, and on the y-axis will show the rate of photosynthesis. This is called action spectrum. So we are finding out in which region of the visible range the rate of photosynthesis will be higher, and we will try to find out whether this graph corresponds to the absorption spectrum graph, whether the two graphs will show us the same result or the similar result or not, and based on that we will conclude that which of the pigments will show maximum absorption as well as rate of photosynthesis. Alright, so for this graph, this rate of photosynthesis is measured by the amount of oxygen evolved. So the more amount of oxygen evolved means higher rate of photosynthesis, right? Because oxygen is evolved as a byproduct. So for this, we get a graph which looks like this. This is light peak at the bluish region, then there's a drop, and then again there's a peak at the reddish region. Alright, so we can say that this is quite similar to the graph of the absorption spectrum, where we also find that the maximum absorption occurred at the blue and the red region, that is around 400 nanometer and 700 nanometer, right? Similarly, we can see that the rate of photosynthesis is also observed the most at the 400 nanometer and 700 nanometer, which responds to the blue and the red light wavelengths only. Now what we can conclude, if we can superimpose these two graphs, or just the graph of rate of photosynthesis along with the graph of absorption spectrum of only chlorophyll A, then we can find a graph which looks like this. Here it is showing the light absorbed, and now we will superimpose both of the graphs, the absorption spectrum and the rate of photosynthesis or the action spectrum. So the graph for rate of photosynthesis was like this, and the graph for the absorption spectrum of chlorophyll A specifically, just the chlorophyll A, it showed the highest peak at the blue region and then another peak at the red region. So this was about the chlorophyll A graph. Now what we can conclude from this, when we superimpose the two graphs, we can conclude that chlorophyll A is the chief pigment which is responsible for the absorption of light, for the maximum absorption of light. Because for chlorophyll A, we found that the highest peaks were obtained in the absorption spectrum here. That means chlorophyll A was absorbing the maximum light at the blue and the red region. Although other pigments were also absorbing, but not as much as chlorophyll A. And also the rate of photosynthesis is higher at these regions, blue and the red, where the absorption spectrum of chlorophyll A was also the highest, isn't it? So we can say that chlorophyll A is the chief pigment which is associated with photosynthesis. Okay, now look at this graph. If we see in this region, where do you think this type of light absorption is occurring by which other pigments? Although chlorophyll A is the chief pigment which is absorbing most amount of light and showing us the higher rate of photosynthesis, this graph here shows that there are other pigments too which are absorbing the light of different wavelength other than 400 and 700 nanometer, right? The specific wavelengths which are lying between the 400 to 700 nanometer range, because otherwise the graph would coincide 1 to 1. There will be a complete overlap between these two graphs, but since these two graphs are not coinciding or superimposing each other completely, that means that there are some pigments in between here which are showing the rate of photosynthesis not done by chlorophyll A, right? So we can conclude that chlorophyll A, although is the chief photosynthetic pigment which carries out maximum photosynthesis at red and the blue light, and the rate of photosynthesis is also higher, there are other pigments as well, which are also absorbing the light and carrying out photosynthesis. So what are those pigments? Those pigments are the other three pigments out of the four that we studied. The other thylakoid pigments, which were chlorophyll B, xanthophyll, and carotenoids. So these are the other thylakoid pigments. These are also called as accessory pigments. Why are they called accessory pigments? Accessory means helpful. So these are the helpful pigments which absorb light of different wavelength other than the wavelengths absorbed by chlorophyll A. So they ensure that the other wavelength lights, they ensure that the light of different other wavelengths than 700 nanometer, the light of the wavelength which lie between the 400 to 700 nanometer are also absorbed, so that more amount of light is absorbed, and these pigments, they absorb the light energy and transfer that energy to chlorophyll A. So they are kind of helping the chlorophyll A to absorb more and more amount of sunlight to carry out photosynthesis. Hence they are called accessory pigments, and they are absorbing the lights other than the blue and the red region, the region which is lying between the 400 to 700 nanometer. I hope it is clear. Alright, so these are called accessory pigments, and their function is to absorb light and transfer the light energy to the chlorophyll A. Besides that, they also prevent the photooxidation of chlorophyll A. What is photooxidation? When the chlorophyll gets damaged because of intense sunlight, then that damage is called photooxidation. So, in order to prevent photooxidation of chlorophyll A, these accessory pigments help by protecting the chlorophyll A from photooxidation, and their other function is to utilize wider range of wavelength for maximum absorption of light for photosynthesis. Wider range of wavelengths of incoming light. Alright, so I hope this session about the photosynthetic pigments is clear to you. Let me summarize quickly. The photosynthetic pigments are special substances which have the ability to absorb the incident light at specific wavelength. When we talk about the green plants or the leaves that carry out photosynthesis, then the shades of those leaves vary among different plants. Now, why do we find different shades of green? It's because of these different types of pigments and their variations in different leaves. How do we find about these pigments? How do we separate them? We separate them using paper chromatography, and we found out that the green plants majorly have four types of pigments called chlorophyll A, B, xanthophylls and carotenoids. Out of all these four, chlorophyll A is the most abundant plant pigment in the world, and it imparts bright or blue-green color. Chlorophyll B gives yellow-green color, xanthophylls gives yellow, and carotenoids give yellow to orange-yellow color to the plant. Then we studied about the absorption spectrum and the action spectrum. In the absorption spectrum, we found out with the help of the graph that maximum absorption of light for photosynthesis took place at the blue and the red region of the visible spectrum, that is 400 nanometer and 700 nanometer, and most of these pigments showed highest peaks at these specific wavelengths only. Then we studied about the action spectrum, which showed us that the rate of photosynthesis was also found to be highest at the blue and the red region of the visible spectrum, corresponding to the 400 and 700 nanometer, although we also found a little activity in the middle region of the visible range. So when we superimposed both of these graphs, we found out that the peaks were corresponding to the peaks obtained by chlorophyll A in the absorption spectrum. That means that helped us in concluding that chlorophyll A is the pigment which is chiefly associated with photosynthesis, as it shows the maximum absorbance as well as the maximum rate of photosynthesis. However, in the graph, there is a middle region of specific wavelengths other than 400 and 700 nanometer, which also showed the activity of photosynthesis. And why was that? It was because of the other three thylakoid pigments, the chlorophyll B, xanthophylls and carotenoids, which are also called accessory pigments, because they help to trap maximum amount of light of different wavelengths other than 400 and 700 nanometer lying in the middle of the visible range, and they absorb light and pass that light energy, transfer that energy to the chlorophyll A for photosynthesis. Besides that, they also prevent the photooxidation of photosynthesis. Hence, they are termed as accessory pigments. Alright, so this concludes the lecture for this topic. Thank you so much.